Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to Women Who Rock Investigate, an affiliate of Women Who Rock with Success. We report case studies in the areas of policy and government, medical malpractices, health pandemics, biotech and fracking, global climate change, prison, and police reform, and more. Our topics are covered around the latest breaking news reports in the U.S. and around the globe. We can be heard on Spotify, Google Play, Google Podcast, TuneIn, iTunes, Podbean, Airtime Pro, and SAM Broadcasting radio stations, and more. Our handpicked experts on the show provide credible information from their fields of experience. Join us on Thursdays at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time as we discover the latest in news reports. Now join us live in the studio with our show host, Mrs. Diane Winbush.
And good morning and welcome to the show on today, and thank you so much for joining us. Today we have a special edition of Women Who Rock Investigates. Usually we're in the pandemic field, which we're going to pick that back up next week, and then we also explore other different policy and government topics for our audience and listeners. But today we will be discussing some information in regards to online sex things, and so everyone has their view of pros and cons as to what this type of online activity brings. There are two social sides to this. Some individuals feel that this is not right. Some individuals feel that this is entrapment. Some individuals feel that this is something needed to protect the children. And so this is what the broadcast does. Our broadcast brings both sides of the story to the public so we can be able to decipher. We can also be able to learn from what our guests with their expertise can be able to share. So we have two guests that will be with us on today, and our first guest is Dan Wright, who is an advocate for criminal justice reform, and we also have Special Victims Prosecutor, and she's also the member of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, and she is none other than Kathryn Marsh. So good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Diane.
Great. So we're going to first start out with Kathryn. Is Kathryn on the line? Okay, I'm not getting a reception out of her. So first of all, we can go to you, Dan, while we can be able to get that tweaked right quick. Tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, thank you, Diane. So my background is more of a logical, analytical mind. I have an electrical engineering degree, and I also have an MBA. All of my education's back in the 90s, and then I got my MBA in 2010. And I really had no interest in criminal justice reform until just recently, about 4 years ago, when our son was actually arrested in one of these sexting operations. And since then, since 2016, I've been reaching out, and it's almost like a part-time hobby, working with others to find out about these things and do a lot of research and work with others. And we're finding there's a lot of injustice regarding the sentencing parts of these things.
Okay, great. So, Kathryn, do we have you on the show? We're still not getting a reception from her. Okay, so we'll continue with that. I think she's on, but I think it's a problem with her phone. I'm not for sure. So we'll continue on. Okay, so tell us a little bit about your purpose as an advocate. I know that you talked about you was kind of brought into this. This was not something that you kind of woke up off of a dream or something. This is something that you was brought into in regards to a family member of yours, and give us the take on that.
I'm sorry. I just kind of got distracted here. Diane. Let me.
Okay.
So you're asking about, how I got involved and how this all got started. Then.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Kind of correct. Kind of elaborate a little bit more as to. You don't have to bring in names or anything like that. Just kind of tell the audience as to why this is such a passion for you, as to what drove you into getting, tuned in with how law enforcement conducts online internet sexting.
Yeah, so it pretty much started back in 2016. Our son was in the Army, and he was looking online to hook up or have a date with women, and he used this Craigslist casual encounters to actually find a hookup or a friends with benefit type of relationship. He was new to this, the online dating world. He really dated much, and he was going out there trying to meet people, and somehow conversed on an ad with someone who was an actual law enforcement, and went down this sort of rabbit hole, so to speak. Ended up conversing and talking to them, and met up with them, and got arrested. When he got arrested, we got a call as he was in jail, and then we're like, oh, what do we do? So we had to hire a lawyer really quickly, and then we started getting in the mix of these things, and that's when I got involved, and I started doing a lot of research. I said, well, what is it about these things? How do they work? What are we facing, especially with these really egregious charges that they put on these people who get arrested, and the shaming they do by doing their press release out there. So with Ezra and the lawyer, they were telling us he was facing pretty much 69 months or more, 69 to 90 months for his charge. And the next thing I did is I went out there and looked at all these sting operations, and I started to put together a list and tried to figure out, well, what are we really facing? What's our best plea? What is our best option? Do we want to go to trial? How do we want to handle this? Because the lawyers, they didn't seem to be that helpful. They'll work with the prosecutors, and the prosecutors will come back, and they did, and they came back with a blanket plea and said, hey, 60 months, lifetime parole, indefinite sex offender registration. It's a felony A, very, very severe charges. So we said, well, we're just going to go to trial. And we did go to trial, and we lost. And the jury didn't buy in, and it didn't matter that our son had a perfect record. He had no prior history. He had none of this child porn or anything like that on his phone, no predisposition. They didn't really care. And in these cases, there is no victim. In the end, he ended up getting sentenced to 50 months to life, because it is in front of the board review. Though he was looking at around 69.75, the judge did give an exceptional sentence in his case. It's not the way it is in many of these cases, fortunately. The average sentence, over 6 years. And the prosecutor wanted a month. So this kind of led us down the same path. Is like, why? Why are they punishing these cases without victims so severely? And it didn't make sense to us. And I was able to connect up with other people, and we're all fighting the same thing. Our sons and husbands and friends are all getting these egregious sentences. And this is in the state of Washington. Other states are kind of similar, but maybe less sentences. We couldn't figure it out, and so that's kind of what led me down this path of research and to find out more. And to try to fight this injustice, and we still continue to this day to fight this with our son's prison.
Okay, great. So you have been on several interview platforms in regards to advocating for your son and how you felt about the sentencing. You have shared also with me, we have discussed this before, even the broadcast several weeks ago, that you're not erasing his behavior, or you're not trying to obscure his behavior or what he has done. Your voice to the to America is in regards to the sentencing, as to how harsh it was, and by him pleading guilty to that fact, you felt that was just a little bit too harsh. So even when you were on the Dr. Phil, I watched a little bit of that clipping on December the 7th, which was, I think it was a couple of Mondays ago, or a few Mondays ago, so to speak. And so even with that, what was you wanting to get that audience to be able to see on Dr. Phil? You know, our platform is a little bit, probably does not have the huge high ratings as Dr. Phil. So why, what were you trying to get the audience to take away from your message about your son?
Yeah. First off, I was really in the audience of Dr. Phil. I wasn't on the show. That was Kathleen and Araceli and their sons. I am familiar with everybody that was on the show, minus the commander. And, I mean, the real point of what we're trying to get across here, and I don't think that came across on Dr. Phil, was that the law enforcement is going out and they're performing their tactic on adult dating websites, 18 and older websites like Craigslist, like Whisper, and like Grindr and others. They're going to these sites and they're posting, messages and doing a bait and switch, so to speak. And they have different tactics where they'll act as a mother, pimping out their children, or they'll act as a young, 13-year-old. But there's a lot of deception, and there's a lot of challenges for these guys that are responding to these ads. And it's very, very deceptive. And even though, Dr. Phil went in and pointed, but she says she's 13-year-old, but everything else leads you not to believe that, whether it's pictures, whether it's conversation, whether it's everything else. The people who are out there on these dating sites, they're playing the numbers game. They're trying to go out and they're trying to connect up and hook up or find a date, whatever the case may be, and they're responding like our son responded to 9 to 10 ads in one day, and he got one conversation going. And he kept up with that conversation, and he wanted to establish a meeting and see what's going on, see if it's real. And I think a lot of these cases are very similar to that, where they want to have a conversation in person to see what's really going on. They don't necessarily believe it. They don't believe there's a 13-year-old or 11-year-old or there's kids involved. It just doesn't make sense to them. So when they're doing these, they are very deceptive, and they're also not following their own rules. They have manuals, and I hope Kathryn will show up. She's a member of this ICAC. They have a operational standard, and they're supposed to let the target, which is the person, my son would be the case, set the tone and the pace and the subject matter, and he didn't set any of that. He tried to set up a meeting ahead of time. They didn't allow it. They kept forcing the conversation in a certain direction. They got him to capitulate, and, they got him to show up at the trap house, and they got him. And the conversation kind of shows that they knew he wasn't any predator or anything like that. But in the end, that's the way they treated him, no matter what his history was and no matter what the psychological exam.
Okay, and I think we have Kathryn on. I'm not sure if she's having technical difficulties with her line, but she is on the queue. So, Kathryn, are you able to chime in at this moment?
Are you able to hear me now?
I can hear you. Thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful.
Yes,
I'm so sorry.
Okay, no, you're fine. You're fine. So, if you've been listening to most of what, and I'm gonna first of all let you introduce yourself, Kathryn, to the audience, and then the next question is going to be for you, Dan, after Kathryn, who's a special victims prosecutor in this type of field. Dan, the next question is going to be for you because we got to get both sides of the story, and the next question is going to be for you after Kathryn has introduced herself as to some of the criticism that was shared in regards to the segment that your wife set on Dr. Phil, and it was in regards to they felt that you, I guess your wife was kind of maybe trying to obscure it. Now, I know we have personally talked, and you were not trying to obscure the actions of your son, but somehow due to some of the things that were stated on the Dr. Phil show, they felt that your wife did. So hold a pin in that. We're going to allow Kathryn to come in, and she's going to introduce herself to the panel. Okay? Go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. I have been able to listen to everything that you and Mr. Wright have discussed so far. My name is Kathryn Marsh. I am a special victims prosecutor. I've been a prosecutor for longer than I think I have, half the time, since 2003, and the last 15 years have been specialized in special victims cases, so child abuse, sexual assault, and felony domestic violence cases have been my specialty. Part of my job does include working as a member of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force and working on cases of child pornography and child solicitation cases.
Okay, great. So the next question, Dan, you can go ahead, and if you feel that question is appropriate for you to answer, you can go ahead and answer it.
All right. Well, I think I would have more of a question for Kathryn in the sense that, you know, she's familiar since she's working with ICAC about these stings, and they call them proactive stings. They have operational guidelines. I have that operational guideline. And I don't believe they are following the guidelines. The judges don't seem to care either. But in the end, Kathryn, my case and our son's case is in Washington State. They charged him with attempted rape of a child in the first degree because of the age of the child, the supposed child, would get 69.75 months. And the challenge I see is that's a victimless crime. They're luring them in. They're on an adult dating site. It is entrapment by all means that the definition goes by, even though they do not try to allow it. The prosecutors work with those who are conducting these things very closely to close the loopholes. Other cases where there are victims, they are getting much less sentencing. One case where it was a 13-year-old, the guy got like 12 months. Another case that just recently came out, a lacrosse mom assaulted a 11-year-old kid many times, and she got a 10-year sentence with a suspended time served and only gets to serve 1 year in jail before serving out the rest of her sentences. So the ICAC and the rest of the organizations are prosecuting these very, very harshly, and we don't think that's fair. We don't agree with any of their tactics they're using. We think there's deception, and we think there needs to be a more manageable means of dealing with these people who get arrested that have no prior history or no prior intent or predisposition.
Would you like me to respond, Diane?
You can,
yes.
Kathryn. Go ahead.
Okay. So first I need to preface that I do not work in the same jurisdiction that Mr. Wright's son's case is from. I'm actually on the opposite coast in Maryland, and so our laws are vastly different than Washington State. So for us, when we are dealing with online internet crimes or solicitations of a minor, we actually have a separate charge that's called solicitation of a minor, which is where these kinds of crimes fall under. So if somebody is online with somebody who's an actual minor or law enforcement posing as a minor and requests a sex act from that individual, it will fall under the sexual solicitation of a minor. We actually have to show as well that they've taken a step in furtherance of just the conversation. So if the individual has been like, where do you live, and has, mapped that information for how to get there, or has tried to arrange the setup, that's the step in furtherance of just the request. Now, in my jurisdiction, that crime has a maximum penalty of 10 years. But if an individual, as Mr. Wright's describing with his son, for example, has no prior record whatsoever, and there was no injury to the child, if it was a real child, or to law enforcement posing as a child, the guidelines would actually be for us would be about 6 months to 3 years. And that's where the sentencing range would fall. And that's not mandatory in Maryland. A judge can still go above or below guidelines, but they have to have a reason. Difference is if we actually have a case where we have attempted rape, and that we have to show more than the conversation, we would have to show there was actual contact to attempt that rape. Our guidelines, if it was a 13-year-old, would be about 5 to 10 years. If we have an actual attempted rape or a rape on somebody who was 11, like the case Mr. Wright was describing that got, I think he said 10 years, that's a mandatory minimum of 15 years for us if we have an attempted rape or rape on an 11-year-old. And so our guidelines and our crimes seem to be set up vastly different than Washington State for these kinds of offenses.
Okay, great. So what is the purpose? And everything has a purpose because people are concerned about their children, and this question is for Kathryn as well. People are concerned about their children. We have all types of chat rooms. We have I have grandchildren myself where they have been approached through certain games and what have you, and people are concerned about that. So what is the purpose? What is the law enforcement trying to narrow down with online sextings?
So absolutely. I should preference this with I myself am a mom of 3 boys, and so, keeping our children safe is my number one goal every single day. And I think part of this is needing to understand how prevalent crimes against children are and how prevalent internet crimes against children are to understand why we have the different stings that we do. And when we look at some of these statistics, it's really quite terrifying. The main target age range for online crimes against children is 11 to 15 years of age. And when we're talking about foregoing into sex trafficking, we're about at 11 to 13 is the average age at which children are recruited into sex trafficking. When we look at sextortion, which is the blackmailing of children to send intimate pictures or videos of themselves, the average age for that is 15, but the age range is actually the age of 8 to 17. And so these are the real crimes that happen every day that internet sextings are set up to try to protect. If we can stop one child from going into sex trafficking, that's what we want to do. If we can protect one child from being a victim of sextortion and having all kinds of intimate pictures of themselves broadcast online, that's what we want to do. And so that's the ultimate goal of these internet stings, is to protect the children that are our very real victims. And I will say, Mr. Wright is absolutely correct that there are very specific guidelines that are used that the officer cannot be the one to initiate the meeting, the conversation about the sex acts, and things like that. And so, and I think we should preference, there are a variety of different kind of internet sextings that go on any given day. So there are ones that are set up kind of like Mr. Wright was describing, which are done with the intent to meet either for a dating app or for truly what we consider human trafficking for commercial sex trade. And those are ones that are set up for that specific ones. We have all kinds of other internet stings where we have law enforcement officers who are on social media apps where we get lots of tips that children are being, recruited or are being inundated with child pornography on these apps, who go on the apps and pose as children to see, is this going on, and is there particular users who are doing this more often than others. So like I said, there's a variety of internet sextings that go on at any point in time. The one Mr. Wright was describing falls more in lines with the ones that are in line with sex trafficking and to reduce sex trafficking and reduce sex trafficking of minors.
Okay. So in Dan's case, and after this question is for Kathryn, but you also can respond to this, Dan, after Kathryn has completed her statement. So in Dan's case, he feels that it was a term of entrapment simply because of the fact that it was not an actual female or a child that was on the line. It was an actual law enforcement posing as a potential person that was interested or that was underage or what have you. And so he feels that it's kind of basically entrapment, and it was not fair, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, it was not fair for law enforcement to conceal their identity and arrest their son for those amount of months, knowing that it was not an actual individual. It was basically like a decoy. That's for Kathryn. That's for you, Kathryn.
Okay, I was going to say, I don't know if that was Mr. Wright's concern about the entrapment. And I'm only saying that because I know he posed the question to me about, aren't law enforcement supposed to follow certain guidelines? But I think just for all the listeners, we need to be clear what entrapment is under a legal definition. And then we can explore the parameters a little more. So entrapment is actually a criminal defense. And so it can be a defense to a crime, but to use it, you have to establish that the law enforcement officer, or if they're using an agent on their behalf, is the one who originated the idea of the crime and induced the accused to actually engage in that crime. So the officer, would have to be the one to say, let's do an armed robbery and set up the parameters and basically get the other party to agree to do the armed robbery. That's just one broad example of entrapment. Now, in order to use entrapment as a defense to the action, the person charged with the crime actually has to admit to committing the activity. So if we use the armed robbery example, they would say, yeah, I was part of the armed robbery, but I only was a part of it because the officer is the one who brought it up, and they're the ones who induced me to commit the crime. So that's how entrapment works in the law. So for a sex sting, what typically happens is if we're talking about sex trafficking, commercial trafficking, and trying to stop that, there'll be an ad posted on Craigslist, on a variety of different sites that are used, and a person responds to the ad. The posting of the ad is not entrapment because they very rarely on an ad are going to discuss anything more than being a date or an escort. It's if the conversation goes further and it's request for actual sex acts and for what, in the vernacular we call prostitution. And for that, is where it's up to the person who's charged as the crime. They need to be the ones to bring the conversation beyond the response to a date ad. So the person who was charged with the crime, they would be the one who would have to bring up, engaging in sexual activity, the cost of sexual activity, or things like that. When it comes to Internet stings for minors, the officer who's posing as a minor does have to indicate that they are a minor. They can't, wait till the person shows up at the door and then says, oh, by the way, I'm 12. That has to be part of the communication back and forth before there's ever the attempted meet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, makes sense. Dan, would you like to respond to that?
Yes. Pretty much nailed the entrapment argument. It's very similar in Washington State, and where most of these guys get tripped up and the judges don't allow it is when they say the defense is not established by showing that only law enforcement merely afforded the defendant an opportunity to commit the crime. You got to go a little bit beyond that. And that's where the judges say, oh, no, an ordinary citizen wouldn't have gone through with this. But, again, I would counter otherwise, because what they are doing is they are posting these ads on these 18 and over websites or apps, Craigslist, Badoo, Whisper, Tinder, OkCupid. These are websites and apps where my son and other adults are going seeking out other adults. And they're not just deciding, hey, I'm going to go look for a child, and I'm going to go look for a child on Craigslist or Whisper, Badoo, or whatever it may be. These guys are not intending to find a child. They are responding to ads. Like I mentioned, my son responded to 9 ads that day, and one of them happened to be a sting ad. So then the conversation starts, and it progresses, and it's pretty quick. They are very, very quick to respond and react. And I argue that who is setting the tone and the pace and the subject matter is law enforcement. What they end up doing is they say, hey, yes, they might throw out an age, but in our son's case, there was a mom involved, and he was seeking the mother, and the mother wanted to bring in the children, and then she wanted to see somebody have sex with those children for whatever reason. But there's a lot of confusion that goes through these things, and whether it's a mother or it's a minor, they send out photos that do not look like minors. The pictures might show older adults, like in the case on Dr. Phil, the person looked like a 24-year-old, and the conversation continued because he did not believe that the person on the other end was a 13-year-old. And that's generally how these things go. There's a lot of disbelief. It's very easy to get pulled in. And the other thing I would argue is that law enforcement, they're not targeting. They're just casting a very wide net. They're randomly going after people by posting on Craigslist, posting an ad or responding to an ad or whatever they may do. And it's a very, very broad net. They're pulling in a lot of different people, and most of those people are not going to be predators. They're going to be just regular adults, and they just decide to continue the conversation. And law enforcement will also tell you, hey, bring some lube or bring a condom, so they could help bolster their case and show intent. They'll try to say, bring a gift, like a Slurpee or a movie or a gift card or something, so that they can trump up another charge like commercial sex abuse. They'll try to get you to talk to the fake minor as well, to get you to get a charge of communication with a minor for immoral purposes. So there's a lot of questionable tactics they're using, and some people, they'll drop off. They'll say, oh, maybe there's a 13-year-old, okay, I better drop off. They're wise. They stop. But realize when law enforcement does do these things, they're getting like 500 responses, and maybe 90% drop away, and then the other 50, they continue the conversation. It's just like anything else. It's in the numbers, and there are people who may be more gullible than other people, or suckers, or curious seekers that get brought in on this. And again, I'll argue that our son tried to meet 4 or 5 times before they asked him, well, what do you really want to do? And then he capitulated, and basically then he asked 4 more times that he wanted to meet somewhere in a neutral place and talk about this in person, and he eventually capitulated again and ended up going to the trap house. So that's how our case worked, and we tried to argue, and we lost again in a trial. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get across is they're not always following the rules. They're posting on dating websites where there are adults not looking for children. And some people are getting sucked up into these things even though they're not predators. And they don't care, and they prosecute these people anyway. And that's the problem we have, is there needs to be a reform in that, or a compromise and a reasonable solution, rather than throwing somebody like our son into prison. And he got 50 months. There are other people that I know and I converse with that have gotten 200 months. There's another guy, his son, he got 108 months, and he should have only gotten 90 at max, and they should have allowed a youth mitigation, and they didn't. So they are heavily coming down and prosecuting these, and it's very unfortunate, and it's devastating to a lot of these families. And that's where I get involved, and that's what we're trying to do with our little group, to bring reform and to bring the awareness that they're going a little bit too far in what they're doing. Okay, so with that, Dan, is it that you feel? I'm trying to question this as like in a neutral situation, because I guess online sexting investigations have been out ever since the early 90s. And so I guess when it comes to law enforcement, they're trying to do their part as far as the public is concerned. They're trying to protect the children. They're trying to make sure and a lot of times, sometimes government, judicial officers, or judicial platforms, they look at it, well, this could be my child. So let's go in here and let's pass a law, and let's see if we can be able to protect them. Let's go online. I used to work for the U.S. Marshals some years ago. I had to deal with a lot of them, and I tried my best to stay neutral even back then in the early 2000s. So, and you were saying something in regards, which is going to be the next question for Kathryn, in regards to the reform. So, because we have discussed, you and I, Dan, in regards to that, about prison having some type of program for individuals that are perhaps maybe caught up in sex things, or have, sexual issues or what have you, and things, because we can't erase the fact that he was on the line himself. Okay, how the law enforcement went by doing it, I was not there. That's your son's trial case, and we're not here to judge that factor, as well as we're not trying to mitigate the issue and stuff in regards to they should throw away, the online sex things, because individuals, the law enforcement's entire primary focus and goal is trying to protect children. Sometimes people may beef it up. Sometimes other states may attach different clauses to their laws to say, hey, I'm going to go in here and we're going to do it this way, or what have you. So that would be the next question for Kathryn. Does institutions, from your experience, are they working on anything like that? I know when I was working for the federal institution,
they had programs. I don't know if it was tailored to that, but they had different types of programs where offenders could be able to, go to school, college, different things like that. They had substance abuse courses and classes that they could be able to take. Is that something that we have here in America, where we can, where individuals can be able to, get some sort of restitution from their actions by taking programs while they're incarcerated?
Yes, ma'am. And again, every jurisdiction is different, and the laws are different everywhere across the country. So I can only speak to my experience, obviously. The one thing I want to stress, just because January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and we're talking about sex trafficking stings, Mr. Wright brought up the point of saying, they were posting on an ad for adults. Well, there is no website in the country that allows the posting of sex with a minor. But 76% of sex trafficking of minors, and we're talking in that age range of 11 to 14, 76% of the sex with these minors begins online. And it does begin with the posting of the website. And like I said, law enforcement has to be very clear from the beginning that they are a minor and they are putting that out there before they even get into a menu of items or prices or anything like that. And again, just because it is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, I think it is important that we emphasize the real harm that is done, to children who are being trafficked. And the statistics show that every 30 seconds a child is being trafficked. Now, when we're talking about sexual solicitation, which is, again, as I said, in my jurisdiction, what we have it is if it's all online and there's nothing beyond that, there's no actual intercourse or sexual contact, we have that as one crime. We have child pornography if they solicit, child pornography images, and that's another crime. I make a requirement that before I even come to a sentencing decision myself, or at least what I offer to criminal defendants, is to get a psychosexual evaluation. Go see an expert in the field who can provide to me and to the court a report. Is this somebody who is a low risk to reoffend, a moderate risk to reoffend, or a high risk to reoffend? Because every single person who comes into our criminal justice system is different. And every single case needs to be a personal case where you take into account every single person who's in the system for that case, the victim, the defendant, and who they are, as well as the requests and desires of the victim. And so it's very hard if all we know about the criminal defendant is what we read on messages and exchanges back and forth, because sometimes they're really reprehensible, and you get an awful picture of the person. And so I work with our parole and probation division. We have amazing psychologists and psychiatrist providers who can do psychosexual evaluations and provide an unbiased report to the court. I've had reports come back where I really thought somebody was a really bad person, and the report comes back and says, listen, they are a low risk to reoffend. They would be best treated, best served by intensive outpatient treatment in the community. I've had other ones who come and I thought there was no history, and through the psychosexual evaluation, the person has admitted to, oh, by the way, I've in fact had sex with 3 12-year-olds. And all of a sudden, they're a high risk and they are a danger. And so these are factors that I think is important for everyone to know. The other thing that we have is I'm very fortunate in my jurisdiction where we have, if somebody warrants a prison sentence, if they're getting 18 months or more and they're not staying in our local jail, they're going to the prison, we have one of our prisons that is geared for mental health treatment. And so anybody that I have who has a sex offense, underlying crime, or anything like that, I will make a referral for them to go to that institution. And again, it's a voluntary program. The criminal defendant has to say if they want to go in it or not. And they have a program called the Eligible Persons Program that is geared specifically for sex offenses. and it goes through treatment, and it has individual counseling, it has group counseling, it has all kinds of resources. Because when the ultimate goal is that we have rehabilitated citizens, we don't want anybody to reoffend, especially when we're talking about child sex crimes. So if I'm sending somebody to jail or to prison, or the judges, I'm just requesting it, but I'm not asking for resources or services for that individual, then I'm failing at my job. I need to make sure that with the punishment comes some form of treatment as well.
Okay, great. Would you like to respond to that, Dan, and to the fact that where your son is in Washington, is there any type of reform that he is receiving at this moment?
Yes, I'd like to respond. Thank you, Kathryn. I think you nailed it. I wish you were the prosecutor we had in Washington State, because I think we could have done a much better job at rehabilitation and restoring and not punishing. And you're exactly right. The psychosexual examination is important. We did that. They ignored it. They gave us a blanket plea. We went back and forth with the prosecutors. They weren't willing to change. So it's a lot more harsh, unfortunately, in Washington, even though there was no porn or anything on his phone. So definitely there needs to be rehabilitation. Is there a program like that in the prisons in Washington State? Yes, there is. They have 2 prisons dedicated to that. So our son will most likely go through that if he can get into it. It is an aggressive program. I would rather see him do it on the outside, and we would pay for that. It is expensive, but we would do that and have no problem doing that. And I think it's all about the proper rehabilitation and restoring. And maybe every one of these people have some issue, whether it's porn addiction or sex addiction or whatever. And there probably does need to be some counseling, and there needs to be some rehabilitation. So I think we'll agree with that. And we do agree that we need to protect the children. We're not against any of that. If these people do commit those crimes, they need to be punished, and they need to be rehabilitated properly. Those who kind of get swept up in it, like our son and like so many others in Washington State, we want the proper restoration of them, of their rights, and to rehabilitate them properly. So there are different avenues for this, and again, I wish they were more sensical here in Washington State, but they're not.
Okay. So we got a couple more questions before we end the show, and so we want to kind of touch on the net nanny. And so what this will do is to be able to also share with the listeners and the audience as of what the net nanny is, and I guess what the purpose and the primary goal for the net nanny, because a lot of times individuals can know that certain things are inappropriate, and sometimes they will still go to the site even if they know that it is wrong from the jump. So we want to make sure that we put all feet and all hands in. And so this kind of helps the audience to be able to understand a little bit more about the online sex things. And then, sometimes, of course, I've seen several takedowns, on the FBI channel. That's one of my favorites and what have you. And so is it incorrect for them to do that? I don't think that it is, because the individuals, this is my opinion, still being neutral, I don't think that there's a problem with that. People are concerned about their kids. They want their children to be able to surf the Internet in some sort of peaceful way where the children are not approached or presented something or attacked or what have you. This is not referring to anything about your son, Dan. We're just speaking in terms of, how to look at the situation on all sides. you see it in the law enforcement. It was wrong how they may have approached your son. It was wrong how they may have sentenced him to the harsh months that they gave him and what have you, and then the parents may say the same thing. We're looking at the facts. We want our children protected no matter what. So we're trying to stay on both sides of the fence, bringing information to that. So either one can be able to respond to that, but I would rather for Kathryn to be able to respond to it on a legal perspective, and then, Dan, you can be able to share a little bit if you decide to in regards to the Net Nanny. So we'll go with Kathryn first as to what the Net Nanny project is.
Okay, so there's different projects all over the country, and when we looked at the Operation Net Nanny, that is one that centered most on the West Coast. And so I'm going to talk about the Internet stings in general because it would not be fair for me to comment on the operations or the evidence in Net Nanny since that's not one I've reviewed. And I would never comment on a case I haven't reviewed the evidence on. But so you have the Internet stings that are set up. And when we're looking at a specific target area, it's oftentimes because we know this has now become a hot zone for human trafficking, commercial sex trafficking, or we know that we have a high number of missing or exploited children that are going in an area. And so when we have data factors that are indicating to us that this is a target-rich environment, we have children who are at risk, or we have a large number of offenders that are coming in through cyber tips or things like that, we will work as an organization, and law enforcement takes the lead to create the Internet stings. And you have a task force, you have all kinds of people who are involved in setting it up. You establish the parameters. What are the goals? And typically the goal in something like this is we want to make sure that we're getting individuals who are trying to target minors, that we want to make sure that our children in this area is safe. Okay, great. How is that going about? How long are we going to set up the ads for? How long are we going to have this sting going on? How many officers are we going to have involved? What's our safety words? All kinds of planning like that will go into the operations. And then they'll go forward. What will happen is if individuals, solicit sex with a minor, show up to actually have sex with the minor, they will then be arrested for the crime that's appropriate in their jurisdiction. The evidence will all go to a prosecutor who will review. Does this evidence meet the standard for the crime? Do I meet all of the elements I need? And can I prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? And are there any legitimate defenses to it? And if there's a legitimate defense or it can't be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, the prosecutor is not going to go forward on that case. If there's not, then the person is going to be charged, they're going to be indicted, and the criminal trial process will begin. Plea offers are always extended as part of a criminal trial process. It is the defendant's choice to accept the plea or not. Oftentimes, I'll have criminal defendants or defense attorneys come back to me with a counteroffer and say, well, how about this? If I have a live victim, I'm going to talk to my victim every single time and find out what do they want before I go forward with any plea agreement. If we can't work out a plea agreement, it is the defendant's absolute right to have a trial. And they can select a trial by a jury or a trial by a judge. And nobody can make that decision for the defendant but themselves. That is guaranteed to them by the Constitution. And then we'll have the trial. And the jury will decide if there's enough evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to convict them of the crime. And I think I just want to point out that a lot of times where I said we're looking for, is it a target-rich environment? Do we have a lot of missing children in this area? Do we have a lot of tips coming in that commercial sex trafficking is going on? Things like that. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has a website that's cybertip.org that takes in tips all over the country for anything that somebody's concerned about that's going online with a child. In 2019, just because I don't have the stats for the year that is 2020 that will live in infamy yet, The cybertip.org website received tips that amounted to over 69.1 million images of videos or other files related to child sexual exploitation in this country. The majority of them actually came from Internet service providers who themselves are finding this just in their day-to-day work, and they'll send the tip to the cyber tip, and then it'll go to the proper Internet Crimes Against Children's Task Force for that area. And you know, that's the data that we're looking at, because our goal is to recover children. You see it on the news when it's 300 children were recovered during this Internet sting operation. 64 missing children were recovered during this sting operation. That's the goal of them. We want to get these children who are in awful trafficking situations home. We want to get them recovered. We need them to be in a safe place. And so that's the data that we're looking at. Like I said, just for 2019, it was 69.1 million images, videos, and files of child sexual exploitation.
Okay, so basically, also in a nutshell, sometimes the online sexting, not sextings, but you know what I'm trying to say, the online activity between
the stings, the upper, right.
Yeah, it kind of starts with the telephone, meeting up, and then it leads to the human trafficking. Am I kind of getting that right? Because I want to make sure that the audience is getting a good descriptive as to how steps may be taken and may, you know, go beyond just the telephone. It may start with the telephone, and then it goes to another level, and then it may go to another level. I know the country of, I think it's Greece, if I'm not mistaken. I think the Christian leader Joyce Meyer had went there to that country and kind of exposed a lot of human trafficking in that area. So I just wanted to, I guess, get a full description as to how it may start. It may start to maybe like conversating on the phone, then they meet up, and then it may lead to something else later on.
Right. So, I mean, and you're right where it's all over the globe. Human trafficking itself is a $140 billion industry, and $90 billion of it is in the sex trafficking arena.
Okay.
And so it's prevalent. It's everywhere. Like I said, every 30 seconds we have a child who is being trafficked. So it is a very real threat in every single corner of the globe. Now, Diane, you dated us a little bit by saying on the phone, because, yes, that's how both of us probably started our career. But now the majority of it actually starts through social media apps and online, and they get to the phone later.
Okay.
So typically what will happen is it will start through just a social media app, or online gaming is huge. And then from there it'll be like, oh, now that we've talked a bit or we've exchanged information or pictures this way, now give me your phone number. And now we'll start texting, or we'll go through another app on the phone. And so, right, that's kind of how it starts, is we're looking for where are our children most at risk. And where our children are most at risk based on what the data is showing us is where we want to set up these Internet stings. Because, again, our goal isn't to try to entrap an innocent person in any way, shape, or form. Our goal is to keep children safe and to rescue children who are in bad situations.
Absolutely.
So,
Dan,
the one part,
go ahead, Kathryn.
I was going to say, a lot of times we do the reverse stings, where it's officers responding to ads to see if it's a minor, so they can go to a hotel room and rescue a minor. And so you can have both going on simultaneously.
Okay. So go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. I'm all for protecting the children. I'm all for making sure that law enforcement does this the right way. And I think by being on social media, Facebook or what have you, where there are minors, where minors go, is the right approach. I think we need to be very careful about them on these dating sites. And I know, Kathryn, you mentioned that there is human trafficking going on. I don't dispute that. There's some of that stuff going on, but I think law enforcement or the media overblows it. I know that the statistics do state that generally around 95% of issues with minors or encounters or sexual abuses or what they may be are often done by acquaintances or family members, and maybe 5%-ish is by strangers or people they don't know. On the net nanny, I wanted to point out that in one of the press releases, they did say the operations that targeted individuals who wanted to sexually exploit children. And my argument is that the Washington State Patrol in this case, they posted on Craigslist casual encounters, and they either responded to an ad or somebody responded to their ad. These individuals weren't going after children. They were lured in by law enforcement who ended up offering up children or were acting as a minor. So I want to just emphasize that no individuals were targeted. These are all random people, and if they do go after targeted people who have some kind of background, I think we'd be okay with that. I don't have an issue there. I wanted to also state in Washington State they do have a special rule like a sex offender special sentencing agreement, and the problem is you have to show a relationship with the victim, and we tried to use that in our case so that our son would only have to serve up to a year in jail, but they didn't allow it because there was no victim. So a lot of what they did in Washington State is they tried to get around all these loopholes, and we couldn't use any of them to our advantage. So, there's a balance in these things, and I think they need to be done there's a better approach, and then there's a better resolution, and that's kind of my last point there.
Okay, and it's your opinion, and you're entitled, and so we thank you so much for that. And I'm pretty sure that law enforcement or perhaps maybe increasing their skills as to how to go by, eradicating it a little bit more different or a little bit more better. I'm not for sure. I don't live in Washington, and I'm not from Maryland either. But the purpose of today was to kind of get both sides of the story, get both sides of the actual topic. Just like I stated before, parents would probably be outraged, in regards to that. And then on your perspective, you felt that, the law enforcement may have done some things that were out of their jurisdiction that they shouldn't have done, as to how they perhaps maybe have caught your son up into this thing and what have you. And so I think I'm just going to leave it like that. I don't think I'm going to say anything else in regards to that. Any last tips or points, Kathryn, that you would like to leave?
I think it's important, one, for parents and for any youth to understand there is the cybertipline.org. If any parent or child is concerned about Internet activity, solicitation of their child, or anything that goes on like that, it can be an anonymous report. They can file that report. It'll get to the appropriate law enforcement officer. Somebody can make the report if they're concerned about a friend. Our goal is to make sure we have our children safe, and any assistance we can get in that is what we want to do.
Okay, perfect. So today, audience, we have heard on both sides of the calibration. We talked about online Internet sexting. Mr. Dan Wright shared his personal story as to what happened with his son and as to how he felt that law enforcement should have perhaps maybe adjudicated the issue. And then also we had Prosecutor Kathryn Marsh that brought us a ton of resources, wealth of knowledge, and as to how all of us, or individuals, youth especially, to keep themselves abreast of online activity that is not appropriate or what have you. And I would like to leave this part, and I really don't want to, but I would like to leave it in regards to that. I feel that if a room is dark and we know we shouldn't be in the room, don't walk in the room. And if a door is open, I don't have to walk in it just because it's open. So in regards to that, like I stated before, people can see this topic on both sides of the fence, and we have to maintain law. That's number one. And then also law needs, reform, I feel, greatly about that as to how individuals are being reformed from some issue that they may have and what have you. And if they become incarcerated, I'm not saying it's the institution's full responsibility to reform a offender. I can't say that because that would be at the taxpayer, and then that would make the law enforcement seem as if they're a parental guidance to all offenders. But I feel that if a person is repetitive in an specific issue, I feel that now, some sort of prison reform should be activated for that individual so they can be able to get some help. And just a quick note, while I was working for the federal facility, it was this gentleman had came in, and he was in there for sex, online sex activity, and it was with a male, and so the judge sent him a bond. The judge was nice. I'm going to give you a bond. As soon as he gave the gentleman a bond, we don't like to call people inmates and prisoners and things like that. People are citizens of America as well. But as soon as the judge gave the offender, the gentleman, a bond, we had to go back and pick him up just a few days later. And so he came back to the federal institution, and then after that he stayed there about 3 weeks or something like that. The judge was gracious to him again, and he gave him another opportunity to be able to get it right. And the individual went right back out there and did the same thing to the same person for the third time. So those are the type of individuals that, on my perspective, that really needs the reform, because something is not clicking in, or perhaps maybe they have a low self-esteem about themselves and they feel that they don't have to, maybe seek out help or what have you and things, and maybe a loner. I'm not for sure what the issue is. I feel that prison reform programs for prisoners are for those that have a repetitive offense. They continue to do the same act over and over and over. If I do something one time, a program is not going to stop me from doing it again. It has to come from the mental estate first. I've got to want to stop. I have to have it made up in my mind that I want change. I'll do this a different way, but I'm the one that's seeking the change. And so that's what I try to help individuals as well myself, is to be able to see both sides of the fence. So with that being said, Kathryn, if you would like to, at this time, you could be able to share with the audience, if you like, of how they can be able to follow you, any social media platforms, any publications that you may have written, any classes that you may have up that you're teaching for the public. You can be able to do that at this time.
Thank you very much, Diane, and thank you for bringing attention in both sides of the issue on this very important topic. Easiest way to follow me or information is through on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, No Gray Zone RRC. And also we have our website, which is WrightResponseConsulting.com. We have articles on there that we have published. Our goal, again, and we have our podcast, No Gray Zone, and that podcast focuses specifically on issues of sexual abuse, sexual assault, domestic and workplace violence. We try to keep it short, just tips of how to protect yourself or a loved one and what to do if you ever get in this situation. We try wholeheartedly to, quite frankly, I would love to be put out of business on the prosecution side and not have another child abused or another person be a victim of sexual assault at all. We have trainings coming up with the Public Safety Training Center that people can go to and sign up, or you can catch any of the ones we've taught before. as well as the National Criminal Justice Training Center. If anybody would like us to come and talk to their community organization, we have specific trainings on just internet safety for kids that's geared for them, and for parents on signs and what to look for. And you can just shoot us an email or DM us right through the social media. Again, I'd love to put myself out of business if I could and make sure that we just create a safer environment for everyone.
Absolutely. Okay, and Dan, this is your opportunity. If you like, you could be able to share more about the advocacy that you are trying to push in America for your son's case, and how you see as your perspective as how things were done on the law enforcement realm. You can be able to share whatever upcoming movements that you have. You can do that at this time. And even if you want the listeners to be able to follow you and your wife, your significant other, you can do that at this time.
Okay, thank you, Diane. I appreciate you having me on today and giving voice to this side of the story. And a good friend of ours said it's not the justice system, it's a system of laws, and if you want justice, you need to change the laws. And that's what we're about in our group. And we formed a little group, and we call it CAGE. Our website is cage.fyi, and it's Citizens Against Government Entrapment. And we concentrate more on the sting operations, and what we want to do is try to fix these and reform the law. So if anybody out there is caught in a sting or have a family member caught in a sting, just reach out to us at our cage.fyi website. We're going to help and support however we can. I did want to toss out a Bible verse because I am a Christian. There are two, Proverbs 18:21, which is the tongue has the power of life and death, and James 3:8, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a relentless evil full of deadly poison. And, you got to be very careful what you say out there online. You have to be careful if you go to dating sites or hookup sites. There are fakes and scammers. There is human trafficking, as we know, prostitution. There's all kinds of illicit activities, and sometimes there's law enforcement. As we said today, if the conversation seems suspicious, it probably is. And if it's too good to be true, watch out, stop and get away. And just be very careful online, in real life, about what you say and what you do. And don't lose sight of your moral compass. And be careful what your gut tells you. You got to listen to that. So that's all I got to say, and I thank you.
Okay, and you are so welcome, and I thank you for wanting to be a guest, to be able to have your voice to be heard on that topic. And I certainly thank Kathryn for taking out the time on her busy schedule for providing the resources and the training for us, because a lot of times we can get caught up in the fact of something that we disagree with, but we have to have facts in order to substantiate what it is that we are pushing for our specific movement. So thank both of you for being a guest on the show today, and for all upcoming events. For listeners, you can be able to go to our website at www.womenwhorockwithsuccess.com. So thanks again, everyone, and take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.